We're good to go. And we're live. Welcome everyone to another, I will say, episode of this webinar series. I'm too much in the podcast mindset. I'm a bit new on the webinar, but welcome everyone to the webcast series and to another fantastic webinar where we're going to explore with Chris Romeo on the journey of application security, metrics that matters, and data that matters. Before we kick off, Chris, tell us a little bit more about you. What's your experience and your journey in application security for the very few folks that doesn't know you?
Well, Francesco, thank you. It's the first time that we've ever been kind of, in the webinar, in the podcast world together. So I'm super honored to be here with you and be, interacting with the audience here. But, my journey with application security goes back, a few hundred years back to, the 1990s or so. Not quite that long, but I've been doing this for a long time in the general world of security. So I got my start back in 1997. Really by accident. So it's a bit of a funny story. I was sitting at a recruiting event in Washington, D.C., and they used to have these giant recruiting events with you could get a job on the spot. They would interview you and they would say, okay, go talk to the HR people over there. They would write you an offer and you would sign and you would be working. Like what just happened? I just got a job. So I'm standing in line. I'm waiting for this defense contractor. There's like 100 people in line in front of me. And I look to the left, and in the room, there's a guy sitting, typing on a laptop, and nobody is talking to him. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go over and talk to this gentleman. And so this line will be waiting for me when I get back. And so I go in and I start talking to this guy. And he's like, oh, well, we have this security, consulting company focused on the government. The year is 1997 right now. Nobody has a security company. And so I didn't even know what he was talking about. And he said, oh, well, we're looking for a system administrator. I was like, oh, I could do system. I'm a system administrator. That's what I do. Well, lo and behold, I went to work there as a system administrator and they transformed me into a security engineer. I got to work with some people who were chief scientists at NSA that had retired and come to this company. And they literally taught me. They would sit at the whiteboard and I realized now looking back, I would ask them dumb questions. And they didn't even act like they were dumb questions. They spent the time and they wrote on the whiteboard and they explained to me, how access control works and how authentication works and how the requirements fit into these things. And, from there, I went to, I had a number of different roles along the way, but I went to Cisco. I was Cisco's chief security advocate for a number of years where I got to really improve security inside of Cisco, focused on internal products. From there, I founded Security Journey, where I built a whole security training platform around application security and sold that back in May of 2022. And now, I find myself with a new venture referred to as Curve Ventures, where I do some investment, I do some consulting, and also a little bit of product incubation, if we can, understand what that means. That means I've got more ideas, and I can't wait to work on them in a laboratory and then get them to the market as soon as possible. So that's my story. That's where I'm coming from.
Brilliant. And there is a lot of Appsec problem that we need to fix, and we're going to talk about it today. So I want to bring on the screen the agenda of today, and then we're going to conclude on this. So we want to talk today around the application security program, how to start, what are the metrics that matters, and what are the scaling challenges that, Chris, you've done plenty of them, and you've seen plenty of stories, and I would like to share those great stories with the audience, because I think everybody struggles around measuring what to do and when to do specific things. And there are fantastic frameworks out there, but they're not very well known. So I'd like to bring it on the table. And then if we have time today, we can talk about CVSS, CWE, and the traditional other gruesome aspect of application security program, that is triaging and dealing with vulnerabilities. The boring stuff of Appsec, that is what we do best at Phoenix Security. Removing the boring stuff so that people can have fun. Anyway, so on the Appsec side, why is Appsec so complicated?
Oh man, how many
$1 million
hours do we
question.
have? Do we have hours to this recording? Why is Appsec so complicated? Yeah, I mean, when I think about the entire umbrella of application security, and I think about all of the different pieces, for me, it really comes down to four things. Like when I define AppSec and AppSec programs, and I think the complexity comes out of all of the different intricate pieces of these four things coming together. For me, it starts with people. Like for me, people are what I always focus on. That's why I started Security Journey. That's why we built a training platform, because I really believe people are at the core of what we need to do from an AppSec perspective. But the people bring lots of challenges because the people have different levels of knowledge about security. They have different experiences. They have different expectations, different levels of patience with the tools and things that we throw in their direction. And so some of the complexity comes out of the people side. The second thing for me is process, right? Security development lifecycle is what I live and breathe. Like if you don't have a secure development lifecycle as the core of what you're doing from an AppSec program, you're in trouble, because at that point, everybody's just trying to figure out what the heck they're doing with no structure and no approach. And so I don't think we need a process where we have 27 printed binders that have all of the information that we have to follow. But secure development lifecycle has to be at the foundation. That doesn't bring in that brings in a little bit of complexity, but it also brings down some of the complexity because we know what to expect. At the end of the day, developers want to know what we expect of them. If we just clearly tell them what we want them to do, instead of making security this mystic thing where, we're the security people and we know what we're doing, developers just want a clear guidance as far as what they're going to do. Third part of this for me is tools, and tools can bring in some complexity. Tools are designed to help the developers be more effective, to be better at what they do. And I think as an industry, that's a place where we're breeding so much complexity with hundreds of different classes of tools. And this is just in application security, of all the different things, all the different, from SaaS to DAS to IaaS to RASP to, container, CVA and all of the other different tools that we bring together. We bring a lot of complexity from that perspective. For me, the last piece is governance, and governance tends to help lower maybe some of the complexity, but also raise some of the expectations. So from a governance perspective, this is where we're putting the policies and procedures in place to ensure that we're getting a unified approach to an AppSec program. And for me, that means that there's going to potentially be some pushback. And so governance is something that comes a little bit later. But really, all of these things together, this is a complicated problem. And I didn't even talk about attacks, vulnerabilities, threat landscape, CVEs, all of those things are just layered on top of what we're trying to achieve from an AppSec perspective, top 10 lists, all the different things that are out there. So it's a complicated world that we live
in. And I think as a security professionals, as you said, not everybody comes from a development world. So it's challenging sometimes to have empathy and to understand the complexity that comes with, can we just upgrade this library, and the ramification of, can we just patch this critical vulnerability that traditionally comes from a little bit on the early stage of like, just fix this stuff, or we have this service level agreement for security, just do this in X amount of time, without understanding that ripple effect and the complexity where that system can be. So for folks out there that maybe are starting the early days and the early journey in application security and starting putting really the foundation, what would be your advice in terms of framework, in terms of matrix, in terms of guidance on, okay, where do we even start? Because there are, as you said, several pillars. Where would I start if I start AppSec?
Yeah, for me, the OWASP top 10, which seems like a cliche answer, is always where I want people in AppSec to start, because I want people to I don't want them just to be able to recite that list. I want them to truly understand what is an injection attack, because I think that's the beginning to really understanding AppSec, is to understand the 10 most prevalent application security risks that we experience as AppSec professionals, as developers. The second piece that I always that I really want people to take away is, I think to be successful in Appsec from the very beginning, you have to know how to code. This can be a little bit of a controversial statement, and I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway, and I'm going to keep saying it as long as I can. And listen, I am not some type of expert developer / coder. Like, my code is dangerous. Like, when I write some code, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it works, but a seasoned developer will look at it and go, "Oh, I don't know why that works. I don't know how it's possibly getting that output at the end, but it works." But I understand object-oriented programming. I understand the concepts behind them. So when I sit with a developer, I know you mentioned empathy. Empathy is so huge for somebody getting started in the industry. Having empathy for the developer, the operations person, the business analyst, the product manager, everybody in the process, that's a superpower, because there's not a lot of people that have that empathy approach. And so having that foundational knowledge of something like OWASP Top 10, and we'll get to some of the other frameworks, but also having that empathy and then knowing how to code, and not even at you don't have to be a super coder. You just have to understand the concepts, because you're going to try to influence, as an Appsec professional, you're going to try to influence developers. And there's nothing, a developer can sniff somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, it takes them 5 seconds to go, this person doesn't know what the heck I do for a living. Coming back to empathy. If you don't put forth the effort as a security professional, the developers they're not going to listen to your advice. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the frameworks that I live in here. You don't know the challenges in coding with React when it comes to, input validation with data coming in, or output encoding or something, that comes from the library. You got to know those things. And so for new people, really, to summarize though, like, have empathy. That's a superpower. Know how to code. Learn those foundational pieces, like understand and truly know them. Know those foundational pieces. That'll set you apart from a lot of people in our industry, from a lot of people that have been doing this for a long time. That'll set you apart.
I want to be controversial, because I think empathy is more important than coding, because you can learn coding, but it's really difficult to learn empathy. And you can always sit down with somebody and say, look, I have no clue about what to do with coding, because not a lot of us folks comes from software development background or can learn this from the get-go. So I think having that empathy stage where you can sit down with a dev and say, look, we have this set of 10 problems. Help me figuring out a way that we can set a policy around this, or agree on what good looks like, because every developer is very proud of their code. So I believe, and I may be wrong on here, that if you sit down with a dev or a community of dev and come up with something, it's even more powerful, because then it's homegrown and grassroots kind of security where you do come together with the team.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I'm gonna join you. We're gonna keep saying controversial things, but one of the reasons that empathy is not practiced so much in our industry is because empathy requires humility. For me to really truly practice empathy, I have to admit I don't know everything that you do, that you know as a developer. I have to admit that you're better than I am at a number of different things. And listen, I've been around this industry for 25 years. I learned a long time ago that there are so many people that know so much more than I do about so many different things, that I approach every conversation. I try to approach every conversation with the idea that I can learn from the people that I'm talking to here. And that really changes my whole perspective, because it helps me to say, I don't know all the answers, because I know I don't. But really having, empathy plus humility is really a very powerful thing when interacting with developers, because it's really looking at the developers and saying, listen, yes, I work on the security team. I don't have all the answers, but what I am ready to do is I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work with you to figure out a path forward where you get the performant features that you need, that are cutting edge, that are helping our customers be successful in their mission. And I get a secure version of that. And together, that us working together gets us to that secure future.
Right. And I think that's a really powerful message. But also, when we start getting into Appsec programming, into big scale organization, then the problem of scale comes about. And we can't sit with every single team, with every single developer, because there are simply not enough for us. I wish I had a team of platoon back in the days when I was running Appsec program, but the truth of the matter is we don't have enough people to cover the ground. So how do we start the step number 2, that is fundamentally, how do we start scaling an Appsec program to match fundamentally an organization that can be 1,000 or even 7,000 developer and having just one Appsec professional, and deciding, okay, which battle do I want to win, which battle do I want to lose, where do I scale, how do I replicate my function across the board?
Yeah, you tapped into yet another one of my passion projects, right? Security champion. So the only true, I believe, and some people might want to argue with me, that's okay. They can argue with me about this, but I believe the only way to scale an AppSec program is through security champions. On the people side, yes, I talked about people, process, tools, and governance. There are other ways to scale, like on the tools side that we're going to talk about here as we continue our conversation. But from the people side, the only way that I can scale an AppSec program is by empowering security champions to join me in this mission of securing the things that we build. Because to your point, I'm never going to be able to hire a 200-person AppSec team. I don't care how big your organization is. You're not getting a 200-person AppSec team. Maybe you got a 200-person.
There are out there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to engage the developers and bring them into the AppSec world as security champions. You have to provide programs that they get value from. That's the biggest challenge that people have with champions, is they always think about champions as it's about me. It's about what I'm getting as a business. And true security champion success comes from me saying, what am I giving these people? What's the value proposition I'm offering them that's allowing them to say, I want to be a security champion. Get out of the way. I'm going to be the security champion for our team, because it's about adding value. And so I created something called the Security Champion Framework. It's free and open source. It's me. I took all of tried to take my knowledge and experience with champions programs and just put it into a framework to help people build successful champions programs. And a lot of people have been looking at it and commenting on it. And so I hope it helps to change how people are approaching champions programs, because I want to see them be more successful.
No, and I totally agree with you. Without that, first of all, it's not homegrown and grassroots. And second, developers are our first line of defense, because let's face it, if they want to do something, they will do something, regardless if security say no or not. They are the first line of progress, but also our first line of defense. So if we get them on board, then it's better. But then on the flip side, we need to tell them what to do with our mystical security stuff. We need to tell them not to fix all the vulnerability, all the problem, but we need to tell them, this is something that you need to focus on, and, do it before, do it after. As a security function, how do we scale that? What are the metrics that we can bring in, or what are the stories that you have in your arsenal that, tell a good story around, these are the metrics that work, these are the metrics that don't work? I want to hear that.
Yeah, let's start by talking about metrics at the process level from a security development lifecycle, because I've got some kind of high level program metrics, but I've also got some process level metrics, and I think they both work together. And then I'll tell some stories / experiences of trying to incorporate various scanning tools and whatnot, and what that does to the developer experience from a metrics perspective. But when I think about metrics at the process level, at security development lifecycle, for me, there's various pieces that exist in the SDL, and we want to provide metrics on those various activities. So for me, let's start with threat modeling, one of my other passions in life. I want to know the number of threat models being performed. I want to know the number of threat modeling issues that are opened with mitigations applied to them. So I want to be able to measure my threat modeling component within my program. And some of those in the early days, I'm looking for bulk metrics. I'm not looking for impact. I'm not trying to measure what's the impact threat modeling had. I'm trying to measure how are we even doing threat modeling across the businesses. Also, things like code reviews fall into that, like the number of code reviews and number of issues that come out of those code reviews. Security testing, what are the number of? I'm gonna caveat this from my security testing perspective, but what are the number of non-false positive findings that I'm getting from my scanning tools? Because scanning tools are a bit of a double-edged sword in that they're often generating tens of thousands of responses, and those are not actionable. And developers really dislike, and we've all had experiences with tools where we turn on a new tool and we turn on the policies, and the developers get overwhelmed with 10,000 results and they do nothing with them because they're like, can't do anything with this. And so also on the security testing side, number of findings from pen testing, whether that's internal or whether that's external testing, and then number of findings that have remediated along the way. And then for me, I like to know champions at the program level, at the process level. How many champions do we have? What's the distribution of them across the organization? Because I want to see, I don't want all my champions to be from one product. I want to see a good distribution. And then on the training side, training's always, it's been one of my things for a number of years. For me, I think level-based training where developers can achieve various levels is the best way for success. And so I want to see metrics that tie to the number of developers and then the number of levels of training that they've met kind of on their own journeys. Because it lets me get a perspective on what is the knowledge that they've gained at those various levels. And then I can look at that across the entire organization. I can slice it by business unit or by product or, however somebody's set up. And so for me, that's a set of metrics at the SDL level, but I've also got a number of metrics at the program level that I think are important. So let me give you some perspective on that, and then we can discuss kind of how these all come together.
So just to summarize,
yeah, please.
I like to repeat because those are really important points that I like everybody to remember and come across. So when you're measuring, really is the basic stuff like threat modeling and not looking at really advanced metric, but simply if you haven't done threat modeling before, how many times do you do, or how many champions do you bring on board, and how many times they meet with security team, or they perform something, or how many non-false positive ticket get triaged and get analyzed, or even if you don't have that, even just a scanning integration or even scanning code once per week. I think as an industry, we tend to look at the metrics as we need to be the best, but a step-by-step approach, as you just rightfully said, is what really gets people fired up about security because it shows them progress, and then we can make those metrics more advanced and complicated when we outgrow them.
Yeah. Most Appsec programs that I've looked at have dreams of these high-level metrics, but they don't even have the basics squared away yet. And so what I just described are things that I think of this as basic metrics, but it's the way that you really get going. And, I think, we could sit here and think about across our industry, how many world-class Appsec teams are there?
Netflix, probably.
Yeah, I mean, you got to throw them in because
they
know the level that they play at. But then, are there 10? Are there 10 companies? And we don't need to talk about who we think it is or anything. That's not important. But, I spend a lot of time in this industry and I'm like, maybe there's 10, 10 that I would say are world-class. So that means everybody else needs to be working on these basic metrics as a building block. Everybody should strive towards being the best and being on our list of, those are who's the best in the industry. But to get there really takes these just basic metrics and just getting momentum going for your Appsec program. Right. And so, I don't think we need to focus on, and I'm going to share some kind of higher level program metrics, but for a lot of people, getting these basic metrics is really where you need to start. Don't worry about things like, defect density that we can talk about. That's not even as important. That's kind of a level 2. Like getting to, and let me just share some of these that I think are important at the program level, but think of these as level 2 kind of, or level 3 kind of things after the basics. For me, I want to know what's my flaw density per 1,000 lines of code. I want to look at that over time at a high level perspective. I want to look at, and I know Francesca, you've tapped into mean time to detection as being something that that you're focused on as well. But I want to know, how long has it taken us to find these things? How long are these things lying dormant in our code bases? And then the other one for me that's big is mean time to remediate. How fast are we fixing this? Because I don't care how many issues we have. Let me give you an example all the way back to my days at Cisco, a decade ago. There was a guy, FX was his handle, Felix Linder's his name. And FX he's a security researcher. He's done a lot of stuff in the routing world. And FX ended up spending the bulk of his time for a year plus looking at Cisco's routing devices. This is all public knowledge. I'm not sharing anything that's confidential or anything. He found lots and lots of security issues in his research. And so if we had been using just bulk metrics of number of issues and number of vulnerabilities found, we would have looked at, it would have been a really big like upward spike. And as all of his research started to come out, and it could have potentially looked negative, the way that the metrics would have reported. But actually, his research was making Cisco's routing products better and better every day as we patched those vulnerabilities and released them through the PCERT process. Because he was only publishing through our responsible disclosure. He was doing the right thing and responsibly disclosing these things. If we looked at the bulk metrics, it would have looked like things are getting worse and worse and worse because we're growing, the numbers are going up, but actually things were getting better. And that's why I like something like mean time to detection, mean time to remediate, especially mean time to remediate, because that shows me, are we getting better? Are we getting faster at fixing these things as we're being made aware of them? That's a real metric you can get behind, because it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 findings or 100 findings. Mean time to remediate is a metric that balances the bulk of the problems we have by showing us how fast are we fixing them. And as long as we're getting better at fixing things, then that's a positive thing for me for my Appsec program.
I think it displays momentum, and as you say, it's as soon as you turn on Scanner, or as soon as you start researching on a specific problem, it flares up with problems, and it can get really depressing and overwhelming. So these metrics that are not rocket science, even if you have just a Jira ticket that tracks those information, it could be something that you can extract. So it's not rocket science. You don't need, you can get us and plug everything in and we'll give you those metrics, but you don't need those to get going. But they get developer and the whole program team fired up because, it can be a competition of like, okay, we're fixing 15 days, well, 60 days normally, or 90 days as it stands right now. But maybe we shave off 2 days, 3 days, or maybe we focus on strategic activity. So those can be goals that can get really the team fired up, and it becomes even a competition between devs.
Yeah, really. And that's we want positive movement, right? We want metrics that are going to encourage and not discourage. And so I think mean time to remediate is one that can be encouraging. Developers are putting in, especially if we're looking at it and we're slicing mean time to remediate across, individual teams. Let's say a security champion is leading an effort to fix security bugs faster amongst their specific team or their sphere of influence. That's something that we can encourage them by tracking that metric and recognizing the fact that, hey, this team is bringing down the amount of time it takes for them to triage and fix these issues as they're coming up. And that's the culture side of this thing, right? Metrics has to be bigger than metrics, because metrics themselves are really just ways to report data. It's the cultural influences that we have over our champions and our development teams. That's really what positively causes change. And it's a strong security culture really that enables that change.
I agree. Even though with metrics and with data, we can go and create a nice narrative and a nice story with the business. That is the second aspect of a program, because if you don't get the support of the business, program doesn't even get started, right?
True. Yeah.
So how do we what are the other side of the metrics, and what are other things that we can convert? Because let's be clear, if we go to the business and say we have 40 million vulnerability, business say, so what? Okay, we're bad, but how bad is bad, and how bad we were yesterday compared to today, right? How
Yeah, I
we
mean
survive.
that's the part of how what we have to go to the business with, right? Is, you know, metrics allow us to show where we were yesterday, where we are today, where we were 90 days ago, and they allow us to, you know, for example, we can use something like OKRs, objectives and key results. I've become a big fan of OKRs, of using those to really drive change in any given environment, whether it's running a business, whether it's, you know, lowering the number of open issues that we have, you know, inside of our application security program. I think OKRs are a positive way to do that. But, you know, you mentioned going back to the business. That's another superpower that we want to tap into and enable as security professionals, and that is being able to talk to the business, because the business doesn't care about technology, right? The business leaders, they don't. Oh, you mean you have the best possible framework to deliver our front end JavaScript applications? They're like, so I don't really care. Tell me about risk. Tell me about, you know, what. Tell me about return on investment. What am I getting? You're telling me that you need me to spend this many hundreds of thousands of dollars, this many whatever. Like you're telling me you need to spend this. How is this going to reduce my risk? How is this going to ensure that the data of our customers is properly protected, so that we have a positive narrative to go to our user community, that we take security seriously? How am I going to ensure that I don't get yelled at a board meeting? That's what the business leaders want to know. Like, because they want to ensure that your security program and your metrics are providing a return on investment for them, because they're giving you money. They're also providing an umbrella for them that shows, when they go to the board, we're doing the right things for security. We are properly protecting the assets that we have been entrusted with.
I agree. And also, they're great in making risk-based decisions. They're not great in making security or technology-based decisions, because
100%.
90% of them, they're not trained on that. And if you give them the tool and the narrative with probability impact, as you rightfully say, on things that they can make a decision that will help and support you. What do you mean you need support with 100 millions of vulnerability? How much is it going to cost? It's a scary number. It's going to immediately get that reaction. But if you say, well, your business unit or your particular application is introducing a risk profile that is outside the tolerance of the rest of the organization, and by the way, we identify as a security team that we have these 3-4 libraries that we can probably do something, and with a couple of sprint cycle, we can probably reduce that. We'll immediately say, yeah, absolutely. We'll dedicate a couple of sprint time. It's like, it's the same outcome, reducing vulnerability, but is told with a much more powerful narrative, or a narrative where they can make a decision and they don't feel like idiots, right?
Yeah.
And they can support the program.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like, business leaders are not security people. They don't have the foundational knowledge that we do about truly what are they can understand at a high level what are the impacts. Like they you know, everybody knows data breach at this point. Like, they understand that the risk and the cost and the reputational damage and all of those things. I think those are known factors now. But business people aren't security technologists. They just want to understand what we do is going to limit their risk and minimize the amount of money they have to spend to do it. That's because they got a business to run.
Right. And probably at this point, it would be nice to actually, if I bring on board some of the piece of work that we've been working on with Phoenix. That is, I mean, there are a lot of frameworks around metrics and measurements out there, and fantastic frameworks to measure SDLC. But what I tend to find is that from the various areas, practical areas of detection, prioritization of issues and measurement of a program, the metrics are a little bit fuzzy, or there isn't prescriptive. So I wanted to create something that is more usable, a 10-minute cheat sheet to say, okay, what are we measuring? And, everything is okay at different maturity stage, and enable you to slide saying, okay, maybe we don't measure anything. So even measure the number of vulnerability that we have or the criticality of vulnerability we have is good enough. And then maybe in a month we outgrown that, and then we go for SLA and criticality, and then we evolve, and then we go to all the way down to measuring mean time to detection, mean time to resolution. So we're creating this framework as part of also possibly an OWASP project, but we'll publish this in the next couple of weeks. And we'll accept also feedback on what are the metrics that should be here and they shouldn't be here. But what do you think about the metrics and what good looks like and in a business from an Appsec perspective?
When I think about when I look at what you've put together here, it makes me think of some of the other frameworks that exist. In that, I'm a giant OWASP SAM, security assurance model. I can't remember what the other A was now, but our other M was now. Measurements. OWASP SAM is maturity. That was the live on the internet. Can't remember what SAM stands for. OWASP SAM though is like, when I think of framework, I think of roadmap, I think of measuring where an Appsec program is. OWASP SAM is my first. That's where I'm stopping. That's where I'm going to get that. But the thing about OWASP SAM is it doesn't play at the ground level in a lot of areas. It plays at it's the 5,000-foot view looking out the airplane, and let's assess the landscape of where we are and where we need to go. And so when I see something like this. Yeah. It's of the SDLC. But it's not. Most of SAM's considerations are not on the ground driving in the car. It's looking out the window of the airplane. It's 5,000 foot. It's a great tool for assessing the landscape of where we are. But when I look at something like this, I say this is like an explosion of a component of SAM that's taking me down to the ground level. So I'm driving in it now. I'm in the weeds. I'm when I want to be in the weeds. I don't mean to be in the weeds is a bad thing, but we want to be in the weeds measuring, what are we doing from, for example, the tools that we're using inside of our dev ops pipelines, our security tools. Like we want to gain a better understanding about what does maturity look like from these different areas, being able to detect the issues that are happening, being able to aggregate them together, prioritize them, what actions being taken on them, and then how are we measuring these issues? Like I see this as an explosion of an area of OWASP SAM, and I think it's a very powerful thing. And as an example, I mentioned the Security Champions framework. I was talking to the leaders. I was talking to Sebastian, one of the leaders for OWASP SAM, and mentioning the Security Champions framework, and he said, "Oh yeah, I added a link to that inside of SAM." Because the Champions framework, it doesn't really fit inside of SAM, but it fits it. They want to point to it because they're like, hey, we like this idea. Like you're blowing up a particular area. And so that may be where this fits as well, is it's a connection from SAM to something that takes you deeper to a very specific area. But yeah, I think this is a very positive approach. And I love frameworks. I love levels, because it not only lets me measure, but it lets me roadmap. So if I'm sitting here looking at this for my Appsec program and I say, well, let me measure where I am today. Let's go. I'm going to do it right now live. I'm not running an Appsec program right now, but I'm going to pretend. So let's say that I'm looking at, my detection. Okay. So I'm definitely, I have SCA. Let's see, I've got SAST. So I'm probably in an M3 for my detection. But maybe in my aggregation, I'm not doing any aggregation. I'm not doing any prioritization. I'm doing regular review of vulnerability actions for actions. So I'm M1, and measurement, I'm doing no measurement. So what that lets me do, though, is I can look at your framework here and go, okay, I'm an M3 for detection. What do I have to do to be an M4? So I've got some, I've got DAST added in here. I've got API. I've got a little bit more on my tooling, perhaps, that I need to do. But it gives me a roadmap. So not only do I measure today, I roadmap for tomorrow. And that's why I love things like that. And that's what I'm seeing here. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of this approach and this idea, because it lets me measure today, lets me roadmap tomorrow.
And yeah, I like this because I'm a big fan of SAM as well. Enabled me to get a whole touch and feeling of the whole organization and the maturity level of a lot of moving part of the application security program. But what this does is enable me to discuss with individuals and say, okay, as you rightfully said, where are you at the different part of the stages? They're very practical, very low on the ground, and it gives you immediately a feeling of, okay, what do I do next? Where do I link next? What are my next action? This doesn't map, for example, on the security champion program, or to the SDLC, or to the shift left, or to the whole other aspect that are super, super important. But as you rightfully said, it gets overwhelming if you look at all those aspects all together. So this is a practical tool to fundamentally flash out, okay, if we need to start immediately, what do we do around this area? Maybe pick and choose another couple of areas of SAM, measure the maturity, and then define your roadmap to evolution. But sometimes it's easy to just get a cheat sheet and saying, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah.
It's much more practical. And that was the purpose of this. So we're going to publish this in the next probably couple of weeks on a blog post, and then possibly as part of one OWASP project. Still name to be defined. But when did you use SAM? When did you use other framework? How did you introduce them in the organization? So how did you get the whole organization practically using that?
So my experience with SAM has been more of an assessor. So I didn't use SAM when I was inside of an organization. I used SAM in the early days of Security Journey, when I was doing a lot of consulting to fund the business. I got to go out to a startup in San Francisco, and I got to bring SAM to them and then assess their entire operation against SAM. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me, because I was just doing interviews with different people from across the business. And this company was the most mature DevOps company that I'd ever seen, probably to this day. I know there's some other big names that are very prolific in DevOps processes and execution, but these folks had everything automated. This is going back maybe almost 10 years ago. Like they were very cutting edge and groundbreaking in how they were approaching DevOps. But from a security perspective, they had not done a lot from being successful with security. So there was a lot of findings. There was a lot of level 1s and level 0s and whatnot of areas of immaturity. But yeah, it was very interesting to get, as an assessor, to come in and look at an Appsec approach from the outside, and then being able to use SAM once again to measure where they were, but also to give them some suggestions to say, roadmap, here's what you need to do. Like these things where you're doing nothing right now, you got to get to a basic level, because you're missing the boat on, some really almost simplistic pieces of Appsec, which will have a gigantic return if you just get them in process and start doing them.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I think that approach, and maybe looking even at outcome, I mean, we touched in the previous webinar with Brooke, the fact that the more you do Appsec, the less you need to rely on pen testing, the less you need to rely on bug bounty, or it gets harder to identify bugs and issue, and really you want to use the security researcher as those surgical scalpel that finds that particular things. And that's an outcome and a good sign of a good and healthy, I think, Appsec program, where they're not going to find a cross-site scripting or a SQL injection or something that are obvious and that can be found by tooling. And that's my passion on the tooling. Like, there is a whole stigma around this industry that toolings are not going to solve the world, and that's very true. You need to use the tool as a tool, otherwise you become the tool.
And you hit on another one of my favorite topics to discuss, and that is the role of pen testing and bug bounty in the application security program, because I've seen too many people with a very immature application security program. I'm going to do bug bounty. Okay, why are you doing bug bounty? You don't even have the basic scanning tools integrated into your build pipelines. Well, bug bounty is the thing that we should do. Okay, what do? They launch their bug bounty and they start paying lots of money for things that the researchers are using scanning tools and then submitting the results for the bug bounty. And so I think bug bounties, I think to your point, the way you described it, like when you're a mature organization, bug bounty is a very excellent way to find issues that are much more complicated. But I guess a pet peeve of mine is when we do bug bounty with immature programs and we end up paying for DAS scans. Like you could have just bought a DAS scan, ran it yourself, and applied those results. And, pen testing is a whole other issue for me. And it just annoys me that we give so much attention to pen testing in our industry. And the way I know this is because, and do this experiment for yourself. And hopefully, if you, as an Appsec professional, whenever you meet a computer science student, you take an interest in them, you ask them questions about what they're doing, and you try to mentor them right on the spot and give them some encouragement to become a security professional. But I talked to lots of different kids that are in different levels of, or I should say, students that are in different levels of training. And it's always interesting when I meet someone. Oh, I want to get into cybersecurity. I said, oh, really? Interesting. I've been in cybersecurity for a long time. What do you want to do in cybersecurity? Oh, I want to be a red teamer. I want to break stuff. I want to be a pen tester. This is the coolest thing. And like,
I blame Hollywood.
I do too. But it's in our industry, we've created this view or this vision that red teaming and pen testing is the coolest thing and breaking things, and that's what security is about. And like for me, why don't we invest more on the builder side? If we invest more on the builder side, we won't find all these many things in the pen testing world. And it's a world where pen testing is a requirement in so many different standards that, you have to have pen testing. And, Francesca, you filled out these security assessment questionnaires just like I have. And, they always say, what's your pen testing strategy? And I even wrote into some of them, like, I don't have one. I don't think pen testing provides me that much value. And then I got to get on the call.
Good luck going through procurement.
I got to argue with the procurement. I won that. I didn't do pen testing for a product that I was building for a long time, because I got on with their security people and I said, listen, I believe in this thing called RASP, Runtime Application Self-Protection. I believe in these things called SAST, and we actually run these tools. We run SAST in a pipeline, and we don't push code until we fix it. Like if we get a SAST finding, whoever got it fixes it immediately. It was a small startup, so we could do things like that. But, for me, you talked about, bug bounty and pen testing, they have their place. But I don't want to see them as the forefront of Appsec programs. They should be rightfully, and they should be in the right position, but they shouldn't get all the attention in the Appsec program because, pen testing doesn't fix anything. It only finds problems. We need the builders to fix the problems that come out of it. And fixing the problems, for me, is really where it's at.
And it's expensive to fix the problem at the pen testing stage. Is we go all the way back to shift left, and you identify a problem when the product is already built. And if there are fundamental changes like a permission model or an RBAC or an architectural structure, those are really expensive things to change because you need to change API, you need to change the logic of the whole application, and that can be really expensive. And as you said, go and buy yourself a SaaS tool or aggregate stuff. And I would even go further and be controversial to avoid some of the pen testing. It's like we do pen testing on a regular basis to verify some finding, but this is the result of our latest scans. We use Phoenix to actually demonstrate this is our posture right now. And, sometimes we have vulnerability, but we can show the mean time to resolution that it takes us less than 7 days to fix. That is lower than the average industry of 15 days. So it's very quickly to remediate, and we don't need to wait 6 months for the pen test to come out to say, well, you're all okay. It's like, I'll give you right now. That's a bit of a tricky, but I start seeing this in more organizations to say, I'm a small startup. I'll show you my position right now on the security. Maybe I can't afford SOC 2 right now, but I can show you that I'm secure. And I can show you this in real time. And if you use my tool, you can trust me that, SOC 2 is a compliance framework, so governance is not security. Another controversial opinion, but it's true.
You're going to get me started again. Come on SOC 2. I mean, SOC 2 has its benefits, right? Like, it does provide some value, but like you said, for a lot of startups, you can't afford to do SOC 2 in the early days of a startup. Like, if you're, if you're landing your first few customers, you can't do SOC 2 before you go to market. Like, we gotta take this to the industry, and we gotta confirm and we gotta sell the value in this product. And SOC 2 ain't it in the first, in the early days. But I do see, I think it has its value. I think it has, it causes you to think about some processes and things that, as you mature as a company, are good things to do. And if you haven't done them yet, SOC 2 will push you in that direction. So, I don't hate SOC 2. I just think it has its time. There's a timing play when it comes to doing something like SOC 2, and it's not early in the age of the startup. It's as you start to mature and you start to need some of those processes because you've reached a certain critical mass.
I would like to see maybe SOC 2 Lite or ISO 27000 here for Europe Lite, or things that are, not so cumbersome that even as a small startup, you're not going to have a business continuity plan that is super complex, because maybe you're 5 people. But they are important process to have. So even having like the small scale stuff or simplified stuff or alternative, like, it's good enough to actually go and assess a startup security posture by the pen test, by their due diligence, with evidence, of course. You need to provide evidence for somebody to actually be comfortable. That is, I think, more powerful.
Got a new pitch for you. So just like OWASP SAM has levels, why does SOC 2 not have levels? Why can't you have why can't you be assessed at a particular, why isn't SOC 2 a maturity model instead of just a paperwork exercise to create a letter that makes procurement easier for me, which is really what it does, right? That's why we do it. You don't do SOC 2. Nobody does SOC 2 because they see the beauty in it. They do SOC 2 because they want to make procurement easier. But if you had something like OWASP SAM applied, where you had levels, you could measure your current maturity, and then you could roadmap the future. But it would allow a startup to get in earlier when they maybe aren't as mature, but at least they're saying, we take this thing seriously. We're at the basic levels, and then we have a plan that you can assess in a year from now to see, how we move forward. Where do we move things from level 1 to level 2?
Or it can be contractually agreed that you shall be here by these dates, otherwise we're not going to renew. So there is an incentive for a startup to actually grow and mature. I really like the level, maybe the SOC 2 level. But I also start seeing more regulation coming, like threat modeling is seeping inside regulation. We start seeing SBOM inside the US regulation. So I really like the fact that we stop talking just about pen testing and we start talking about shifting left, matrix and matters. I mean, the whole SBOM is a challenging topic by itself, and it could probably require another webinar of why SBOM and not product bomb, or asset management, as we used to call it back in the days.
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at what, the whole SBOM here in the US, the executive order, and I wrote an article about it because the executive order is pie in the sky. It doesn't require any action. It requires people to generate SBOMs. You don't have to do anything with it. You have to send it to them or send it to whoever's buying it. Nobody can process SBOMs at the level that a DevOps pipeline is punching out versions of software. If I deploy 10 times a day, that means I've got 10 SBOMs a day. There's no way that anybody's ready to ingest that and do something actionable with it. And even if they do, now somebody else is running my security program and they're telling me what I have to fix, like as my customer. It just gets weird. And so, I kind of looked at the executive order and some of the language in there, but this will be, that it cracked me up. And I picked on it in the article a little bit about the fact that, this will, they I don't remember what particular topic it was, but they said, this will make things simple. Nobody's making anything simple coming out of this. You should not use the word simple in this document. It's not going to be simple. It's going to be more complicated. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I like to see threat modeling front and center as something that's being pushed, and people are being, if they're not understanding it, they're being forced to look at it and see what threat modeling is, what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
They're finding their way to things like the threat modeling manifesto to guide them in that process. So, I think we're moving in the right direction. I don't know that any government's going to be the right people to really tell us where we need to go from an Appsec program perspective. I think we've got other people who have bigger ideas that could perhaps help to guide it. But, the government's U.S. government's taking kind of a front and center stance now.
It's good to see regulation, because regulation stimulates a discussion topic, at least. I would like to see things more. Well, I'm always kind of conflicted on regulation, because when it's too fluffy and generic, it's non-prescriptive, and when it's too prescriptive, like PCI, it's too prescriptive, and there isn't really any way in between. We're going to argue against either or, but at least it's pushing the industry to things. It's not just operational security, it's not just patching, it's not just operating system, but it's the whole supply chain and digital supply chain that right now requires attention.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case. Like, we know software supply chain is where our biggest challenges lie right now. And being able to have a solid organizational approach to how do we deal with third-party vulnerabilities and open source vulnerabilities, like it's top of mind for everybody. I'm not saying anything novel in this, but we haven't solved it yet. Everybody's still struggling with the same issues, and we have to move forward as an Appsec industry. We got to solve this thing and move on to bigger and better problems.
But in steps.
It's always baby steps, though. It's always small steps along the way to get there.
All right, brilliant, Chris. I wanted to just bring back to the conclusion. And, today we talked on how to start application security program, what are the metrics that matters, how to start with baby step, our maturity framework around vulnerability management in Appsec and non-Appsec, and the baby step. And we touch a little bit on the so controversial SPOM and all the rest. I'm going to open the floor to question, but we have a few minutes left. If you want to leave the audience with a final message while the question comes in, what would the final message be on Appsec and programs?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with something really high level here. And I think that we spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong. I spend too much time talking about what's wrong and what's broken and what we need to be better at. But I do want to offer, like, Appsec people that are working out there, we are making progress. We are moving forward. We are improving our industry. We are taking things like training individual people in your programs, improving your process for security development lifecycle, integrating new tools to be successful, providing a governance angle. Like, it's not all doom and gloom. I spend too much time in doom and gloom. And so I just want to make sure that to the Appsec folks that are out there, like, your hard work is making things better inside your companies. And so keep moving forward, keep pushing the envelope. And like we talked about here, baby steps. Small steps are how we get to a more mature Appsec program future.
Brilliant. And there was one question from Michael, back on the conversation around the evolution and the baby step, that was asking, okay, but it's all good, but how do you do this at scale? And how do you do this with code scanning and other stuff at scale that move rapidly, like in a cloud environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think for, at scale, the same fundamental pieces for small and gigantic, they're the same fundamental pieces. They're the things that I was talking about, from teaching the people, from having the right process, from having tools that provide actionable results to developers, to having a governance angle. Like, whether you're doing that with a small startup or a gigantic enterprise, for me, it's the same component pieces. It's having the team that can help. Scale is about having the team. It's having the champions. It's having enough people on the Appsec team to be able to support. It's having the tools truly give actionable results, meaning low numbers of false positives. It's having a governance angle that allows us to determine who's doing very well so we can leave them the heck alone and let them do their thing, to who needs our help, who needs more investment from the security team. And so that's what I think, and those metrics help us to make that decision. That's how we bring that together.
Yeah, I do agree. It's the baby step is what makes you progress, and you can apply this at individual level or maybe across the board. Maybe the story that's on that aspect I would like to share is when you have a massive organization, start with a small pool of people or teams, and then expand and then scale, because that becomes kind of a ripple effect of people that want to replicate kind of the good mission. We have another question coming in. You mentioned threat modeling. One of the common challenges is how to perform it at scale. Again, I'm curious about your view. And I know the threat modeling manifesto, so go for it.
I love this. This is a great, I love this topic of scaling threat modeling. So at its core, to scale threat modeling means security people can't do it. The developers have to do their own threat modeling. And so really scaling threat modeling it's an education problem. It's a tooling problem. And it's a focus and time problem kind of from the process. And so first of all, we need to teach developers how to threat model on their own. We need to have a solid threat modeling process and approach that developers can embrace, they can experience, and then they can help to replicate throughout the organization. So for me, when I started with rolling out threat modeling at Cisco, I just started meeting with small teams and teaching them one-on-one in front of whiteboards. And I did that. And then I asked them at the conclusion of those sessions, will you please do this same thing for other folks inside of your bigger teams? Will you have these same sessions? And really my approach to teaching threat modeling in that mode is I go into the room or to, in the modern world of a virtual whiteboard and say, draw me a picture of what you're doing right now, of something that you're working on. And then I just start asking questions. And the funny thing is, about half of the questions I think I know the answer to. The other half, I don't have any idea what the answer is. I'm just throwing it to get people thinking. But really, to bring it to coming back to threat modeling at scale, we have to teach the developers how to threat model. We have to give them a solid process that they understand. We have to embed that process into your development process. So if you use Jira to track a user story, don't tell me I got to use some strange system called Cerberus or whatever that sits off to the side and we only use it to store threat models. Make my threat model part of the flow. I get a user story in Jira, I threat model my results land in the Jira ticket that goes with it, because then it's less friction, less resistance. And tooling does have its part here. Having an enterprise approach, an enterprise tool for threat modeling is also something that can help you to scale. But it's the collaboration, it's the people that starts it, it's the process, and then it's the tooling for threat modeling that really helps us to bring it all together into an enterprise grade approach.
Right, because if you just throw tooling, they become shelfware very, very quickly if you don't involve people that use the tool. And as you say, I really like the Jira approach or the frictionless approach. This is something that we nurture in Phoenix Security. Like, everything lives in Jira and then we synchronize on the back. So any tooling that you bring, always hammer the fact that it needs to live in front of the developer, because they already have ID, they already have scanning technology, they already have a lot of tools. Giving them yet another thing, it really needs to bring the value, like a threat modeling tool that brings the whole threat modeling at scale, maybe with default artifacts. Otherwise, live in Jira as much as you can.
Yep.
Brilliant. I think we run a little bit over time, so I really like to thank you, Chris, for coming on the show and sharing your deeper knowledge. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, but it's even more of a pleasure to speak and share knowledge. For the folks out there, I know you've done recently a talk on OWASP, but if they want to find more about your work, about the threat modeling manifesto, about the security champion framework, where they can find these resources.
Yeah, I mean, the best resources are really just connect with me on LinkedIn and or on Twitter. I'm EdgeRoute, at EdgeRoute is my Twitter handle. So from both of those accounts, I post lots of things about all the different projects and stuff that I'm involved in. Also, the Application Security Podcast, and I'm doing a new podcast called The Security Table, which is a lot of fun, where a couple of us in Appsec get together and we just debate lots of interesting things, and we have a lot of fun with it. So yeah, those are some ways that folks can connect with me.
Brilliant. And everybody, if you want to get access to the framework that we're publishing before we make it into an official OWASP project, as it takes a little bit of time to get the project kickstarting, you'll be able to find it at Phoenix Security. Everybody, thank you so much. Chris, thank you for coming on the show. I hope you stay safe, and remember, baby step around Appsec. Thank you.